Well, thank you for having me come out tonight. I'm Jonathan Knapp, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit after talking with David on the road there about some ideas around how to enhance your organization's effectiveness. There's a lot of things going on in the world today, and lots of organizing and people with issues that they're working on. And everyone wants to be effective with their time, and I think that that's one of the keys to making your organization effective is having people feel like that the work they're doing through an organization is having an impact and being something that they want to be associated with. So, without further ado here, I'm going to talk about my title a little bit. You'll understand the joke here with dotness in a little bit. But I think one of the keys to thinking about organizing from the point of view of my work has been trying to find natural leaders in our work sites and figuring out how to leverage them to become active on behalf of the cause that you're working on. So we'll talk about dotness, rebooting. That's the sort of the computer jargon of our day, but it's a little bit apt here, because you already have an organization going, and when I became president of the Seattle Education Association, we obviously had a union going for a long time, but it wasn't in the place where I wanted it to be. So a little bit about me. I am the immediate past president of the Seattle Education Association. Before that, I was the vice president for one term, so I had about 6 years of governance experience with SEA. I am now, and I was before I started all that, a high school automotive technology teacher, so I'm a shop guy, I'm a nuts and bolts kind of guy, sort of figuring out how things work or why they don't work. I guess there's something in common with doctors there. But I've done a whole bunch of things over the years. I did some humanitarian work in Bosnia during the Bosnian War there, as David talked about. I am a former college French teacher, worked actively with the Labor Party. I don't know if anyone here was back with the Labor Party back in the 90s, right? When I came back from Bosnia, we jumped right into that. And then also I was sort of the person on the ground for the whole French delegation during WTO. There was a huge French delegation. I don't know if any of you were in the streets there for that and remember that. But because I have lived in France and speak French, and we went to France in the fall of '99 and made some contacts there, so when they came over, I sort of got sucked into being their go-to person in Seattle, because nobody in Paris knew anybody in Seattle except me, so that was fun. And before that, I actually worked for Greenpeace a little bit when I was much younger. So my background, I'm a preacher's kid, I'm a liberal denomination, and if you know what that means, if any of you are preacher's kids, you kind of know what that means. Sensibilities obviously formed in the 60s and 70s. I have older brothers and sisters. My sister came out in 1971. By 1972, my mother was testifying in front of the Oregon State Legislature in favor of gay rights. So that's pretty early on in the timeline of things. So I've always been concerned about civil rights and workers' rights, women's rights, gay rights. The Vietnam War was still going on when I was young. I was that last generation of people that had to decide whether I was going to sign up for the draft or not.
How old are you?
I am 61.
Whoa!
Yeah.
I was drafted.
So I studied languages, culture, and philosophy. Went to Evergreen. Kind of a late student. I went when I was an older student. Later on, worked, as I said, in Bosnia. Had multiple careers. I got into teaching much later in life after doing a lot of different things in life. And sort of found my calling in teaching, sort of following my dad's example. I wasn't ever attracted to the church, but the sort of the notion of service, finally, as I got older in life, I realized that notion of service was something that really appealed to me. And I'm trained in relational organizing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So when I became president of SEA, sort of here's what my world looked like. I was elected vice president in 10 and then served for one term for 2 years and then became president in 12. At that time, the union was on a financial path to insolvency. It was living off of its financial reserves and was not generating enough revenue in order to survive more than a couple of more years. In 2010, the superintendent had nearly succeeded in breaking the union, and we had a very difficult negotiation in 2010. within the union, a lot of history of factional infighting. When I was elected vice president in 2010, only 11% of the members even bothered to vote in the election. So I was elected with 6% of the vote. Yeah, initially. And by the way, feel free to raise your hand and get clarification on something. I'd rather have this be a little bit more of a discussion than just a total presentation. So if you want clarification or to dive in a little deeper on something as we get into it, feel free to jump in. The union was unable to elect full delegations to its national and its statewide conferences, or we were even unable to elect a complete board. We couldn't even find people to run for the board for the union, for the local. In 12 and 13, after I'd been president for a little while, we still were in a position of weakness, having to sort of accept school budget cuts without even mounting a response. We had upped the member participation a little bit to about 25% in the election where I was elected president. But we still ranked 12th out of the 20 regions within the statewide association in terms of political action, in terms of what we were able to do. And you would think that Seattle, the big liberal center, would be leading the way all the time. But no, we were really a backmarker in terms of our role within WA. So in 2013, we had a really contentious contract ratification meeting where we sort of proposed the contract. That was the best we could get from the district. The membership was partly unhappy with it and laid a lot of blame on the union. We had a contract ratification that ratified with probably about a 58% vote, which those union people know that that's not a good thing. When you vote for a contract, you want to have more agreement about it than that. So the world that we created at SC8 over the period of the next few years changed a lot. By 2014, we had successfully defeated a budget proposal to cut school secretaries, to lay off school secretaries, to cut enough money and lay off school secretaries. We had 75% of our buildings taking strong actions against that. We were able to obviously elect a whole contingent to our delegations and to our boards. At this time, we had a 54% member participation rate in officer elections. We became the strongest financial local in the state. And we were ranked 4th out of the 20 regions in terms of political action in August. And this was around the class size campaign. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a class size initiative. And then a little bit later in the fall, we were first in the state around phone banking for that initiative. And those of you who have done phone banking know that it's not easy to get people to turn out and phone bank. So we effectively doubled the participation rate of any other council in the state. And that's an apples-to-apples comparison because Seattle Local is a council by itself, and so the membership of Seattle Local equals the membership of other councils around the state. So we're not bigger than they are. They have as much resources as we do. So we doubled anyone else's participation rate in phone banking. In 2015, we had a successful 6-day strike working on a common good agenda. Some of you might remember that. Anyone remember what one of the big issues was in the news that year? Anyone have little kids? I'm looking to the younger crowd here. We effectively went to strike over the issue of recess for elementary kids. Over the period of years, there had been such a reduction in lunch and recess time because schools are having to do more testing, that kids were having as little as 20 minutes of lunch and recess together for 20 minutes a day, which is criminal. So we had a citywide protest on May 19th of 2015 where we turned out 5,000 people to protest inadequate funding from the state legislature. And some of these things are a little bit inside the organization measures, but increasing participation rates of all different kinds within our community. We led the state among all the WA locals and councils for our growth of our political action committee. So another sort of measure of how effective you've become as an organization. So significant change from 2012 to 2015 by a bunch of different, fairly objective measures. So how does this relate to you? So I was asked to talk about what you guys, how you can think about your work at PNHP. And, effectiveness doesn't happen magically. I mean, I think this is one of the challenges within unionism. You know, a lot of folks in unionism sort of keep doing the things they've been doing for a long time and wonder if their you know, reduced effectiveness is just a result of the sign of the times or sort of public sentiment. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's magical or happens by chance at all. It takes clear planning and rigorous implementation. You really have to work at it, think about it, focus your activities in a very concentrated way. So it takes patience, certainly takes a commitment. It takes patience and the ability to adjust your priorities. And it takes a fair amount of work to learn how to sort of overcome your own institutional inertia. So it's not magic. There's a few elements to it, and I wanted to talk to you about what I perceive those elements to be and how it might relate to your work at PNHP. But overcoming institutional inertia is a big thing, because people in an organization have been doing things a certain way for a long time, usually. Stan might be able to identify with this from the union context. And that was certainly true within SEA. I mean, everyone had been used to doing these things this way, and this is the way we do it, and when you talk about it, nobody knows why, but this is the way we do it, so this is the way we do it. And that's an actual challenge. So where do you start? So from my point of view, this is sort of the fruit of my experience in leadership, and this is how I would think about, you know, I didn't quite think about it at the start this way, but looking back over the years at the work that I did, this is how I think about it now. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to inventory your resources. You have to look at what capabilities you have. You have to start with a strategic plan. It doesn't have to be a big, in-depth thing, but you have to have some sort of idea of what you want to do. And from my point of view, you have to identify the natural leaders within your ranks. And then from all of that, you need to develop opportunities for collective action. So what are your resources? Well, you can add to this list maybe, you know, you have an active board, you have you have membership data. I know you have a database, you know something about your members over time. You know, who's been active, how much, who's been paying dues, you know, who are some of the lapsed people, you know, but that's useful and important data for you to understand, right? You have a dues structure and you have a dues potential, right? You have a revenue potential. You know, this was a big issue for us because we were on this path to insolvency when I took over. We had to think about these things. What are we going to do with our budget, and how are we going to think about our budget? And you know, how are we going to enhance our potential for action based on the budget? So you have that annual revenue picture. You have some cash on hand. Everybody does. Maybe it's not a lot. I don't know. But you know, those are all sort of some of the tangible elements of the resources that you have. But I also want you to think very, very deeply about what are sort of the intangibles that you have as an organization. Because I think you know, where this relates very clearly to teachers as well. You know, teachers have a high degree of respect in the community, right? When you're polled annually about what professions are the most respected professions in the country, teachers regularly come in near the top, right? Right at the top or right near the top. And I think that's very true with doctors as well, physicians as well. You're always right up there. So that's an intangible, but it's a resource that you can use. Public perception of physicians in healthcare for profit, right? So that's a resource to think about. It's like, how does the public think about you in terms of a for-profit system, right? And you know, in this room, we probably all have our ideas about that. But it's also sort of a public perception. You know, there's in the last decades, there's been a lot of sort of wider understanding of the general public about what is happening to physicians just through people's own experience when they go to the doctor or when they go to the hospital and they see healthcare happening in a for-profit context and what's happening to doctors about how you can only spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes with a patient, and and you have to apologize and get out of the room even though the person wants to talk to you more. So there's an arc of history around that that is a resource for you to think about using. And because of the changes in healthcare over that period of time, that anybody who's not a very young person will have seen a lot of that, and that is an intangible resource for you. And then there's the reputation of your organization, just as an organization of people that have been committed to the idea of single payer and social justice in the healthcare arena. So it's an important thing to think about. It's important to discuss this amongst yourself and see sort of where your resources are. Does anyone have another one that's just you're burning to get on the table that I've missed there that you can think of? If you do, we can come back and talk about it. But my point is, I want you to think about intangibles and not just tangible resources. So, got to do a little bit of strategic planning. If you're going to change the culture of your organization, you have to be self-aware about it. You have to be self-evident about it. You got to talk about it. But my experience at SEA is you don't have to figure out everything in advance. You don't have to get too deep into the details. The most important thing is to sort of take the plunge, say, we're going to do something, and we're going to start with this, right? So you don't have to get every detail nailed down really early on. What's important is to sort of set a goal, and I would think, my goal at SEA was to become effective. SEA was thoroughly ineffective as a local union when I took over, and my goal was to make it an effective organization. And that decision to do that and to bring people on board with that goal in mind was really the sort of the springboard or the launching pad for us in the work we did. So, you might have a goal something like this, but it's up to you to decide. Become effective as the voice of physicians for single payer. It's important to set a preliminary organizing plan. Again, that doesn't have to be at all determined into the infinite future. It just has to be thought about a little bit. You need to think about some next steps, but don't worry about all the problems that are coming way down the road or what ultimate outcomes might be. There's so much that happens. There's so many opportunities that will present themselves in the course of organizing and the work you do that you'll find that you're going to be changing some things from time to time anyway. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that, on trying to think too far down the road. And then you have to devote your resources to this. You have to, and in some ways, that means sort of stop doing what you have been doing that you think is not effective and start doing some of the new things that you think really will make the organization a more effective organization. So, and then as you go, you have to adjust the plans and goals as the reality goes along. Yeah, Stan?
But when I started at my union, they sent me to organizing school for 2 days, and I flunked out very quickly. But one thing I learned in retrospect is that and maybe this is an intangible, but you have to understand the comfort zone of the people you're trying to organize. And by what you do, they have to look at that and say, that has value to me in some important emotional way about my work or my family or my career or my community. And that's an intangible. This is what you all have is a knowledge about where that comfort zone is and how to appeal, so that instead of the organization being something that's done to you, it's something that's done for you. And that's a leadership thing that I see in everything you're saying here, but was actually in the 2 days of organizing school, I didn't quite connect those dots, right? But I was able to connect them afterwards.
No, thank you for that. That's totally right. You're getting to jump on what the next slide is here, obviously, but no, it's totally right. And you're right to articulate that explicitly, because in my mind it was sort of the building block to be working with, but it's absolutely true.
Jonathan, could we back the track a bit? What did you do to go from near insolvency to make it a solvent organization? How did you raise the funds?
So it was a several-year process, actually, but we started out by asking the members, which is a little bit different in our context as a union, but simply asking the members, what are the things that we're on a path to insolvency. What are the things that are most important to you to maintain about the work that we do? And after sort of working through that, figuring out there were some things we could cut back on and make some reductions, other things the members were very clear they wanted to maintain. In that picture, we were able to articulate that that would actually require a dues increase, and we were able to work through a dues increase. But done in such a way that they understood that they were asking for it, because they wanted to keep these things. They didn't want to let go of them, and that would require a dues increase. So it was a long process of consultation, but other things were going on at the same time. I don't want to, sort of, put that out there that it's the first thing you have to do, because it's all of these things sort of can happen all at once. So the next element that I want to talk about is sort of the core of what I think the work is, and you're getting to Stan's point here about leadership. When I took over the union, there was a very small cadre of people that just had sort of been the union people forever and loved to be the union people and had their identity tied up in being the union people, and they were known as the union people and they got pats on the back for being the union people. But there wasn't a broad participation among the membership. Those people sort of monopolized the opportunities within the association, and sort of because the participation in the organization was so limited that those were sort of the gatekeepers for the leadership of the union. You had to appease these people in order to get elected, because they would either support you or not if you were not sort of working with them. And that was sort of regardless of their relationship to the rest of the membership. So that was a challenging environment for us. So identifying natural leaders. What is leadership? Well, there's lots of definitions of leadership, and I think the one that I have used is basically saying that it is taking responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. Right? Going forward, we don't know what's going to happen, but we got to come together and try to move forward together, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. So effective organizations have to have leaders who can do this, who can bring people together for a shared purpose. We don't know what the population is going to think. We don't know what the president's going to do next, although we fear that it's going to be something crazy and terrible. But we don't know the future, and there's an uncertainty about that. So what I call the leadership approach is finding a way to sort of revamp your organization by identifying the natural leaders within your ranks. To build relationships with them, strong personal relationships, and this is around personal one-on-one organizing, and then inviting them to lend their leadership to that new shared purpose. And sort of inviting them, the word inviting is really a crucial key here. And I'll talk more about why that is going forward. But I want to stress the importance of not pushing too hard too early with people that you're just starting to build a relationship with. So how do we find leaders? Well, all of us have sort of probably worked with this at various different times, right? Within many organizations, as I talked about here, in some of the union context, there's lots of self-identified leaders, people that just are invested in the idea that they're the union person. And they volunteer for everything, and they step right up and they want to do it. And that's great, and it's good to have those people on board, because they are sort of crucial to finding, sort of to getting the initial work going. And then the organization often identifies people with potential, right? You all know people that are out there, and it's like, oh man, Mary'd be great. She's so smart. She knows so much about this, and she's so energetic. Or, John is just, on top of everything. We really ought to get this person involved. But And those people are important. I think these first two categories are important for getting organizations going, but for achieving a high level of efficiency and effectiveness, I think you really have to get to the point where you are identifying the people that the peers in your group themselves say are the leaders to them. Right? Who are the people in your work site and your place where you work that if you polled people there, you could get a sense about who they think are sort of the natural leaders, who is trusted and respected in their eyes in that context. Regardless of whether they're already involved in the organization or even have a sympathy with your organization, it's important to know who those people are. So we went out into our schools and we conducted what I called an organizing blitz. Right? We went out in our schools, we talked to as many of our members as we could, and over the course of about 18 months, that was about 2,000 members. I talked to 400 members myself, okay, over the course of a year and a half. And I just sat down with them, and I guess I shouldn't call it talking to them, because it's more about listening. It really is about listening. It's about asking them what their experience is, and then listening. Asking them to share, what their concerns are, and then really listening, right? Sort of getting out of the way and listening. And I would think that you could do this with physicians as well. There are work sites, places where physicians work together, clinics, hospitals, whatnot, to find a way to get them to talk about their experience. And when I was here a few months ago, listening to the organizer from California talking about this very question, he was saying the same things. Like, physicians have incredible stories to tell about the dysfunction of our current system, right? They have unbelievable stories that only you can tell. Just like teachers, in the education context, there are just incredible stories that only teachers can tell about the education system and what is needed to transform it. And so it's not hard to get you talking about. I can probably sit down with any one of you and get you talking about what has been your experience in healthcare and in your professional life, and what your frustrations have been, what you've been angry about, what you've been upset about, what you've been satisfied with, and what drives you to keep going and keep trying to persevere in spite of the difficulties. All of those things are what is crucial to listen to from the people you're going out and identifying. But the key question that we would ask at the end of these conversations, it's remarkable how many times, because when we did it, we just sort of showed up in the classroom. We just went out into schools and showed up in the classroom before school and at lunchtime and during the teacher preparation time, and then I just introduced myself. Hi, I'm Jonathan Knapp. If you don't know me, I'm your president of your union. And I wanted to talk with you for just a few minutes. And teachers are like, oh my God. It's like, okay. It's like 5 minutes. And like half an hour later, they're still pouring out their hearts to you about everything that they're concerned about and what the troubles are and what the challenges are and what they wish would be happening. And literally, they will do that over and over and over again. It's like, yeah, I can give you 2 minutes. And 25 minutes later, they're still talking.
So this is one of the ways I flunked out of the organizing school. I am not a good listener. I listen for 30 seconds and immediately go into problem-solving mode.
You should be a doctor.
I'm saying, okay, right?
Are you also divorced?
Right? Okay, and that's the other one. My wife is working on me with this. But that's a skill that you have to work on.
It's right there, Stan.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. Listening is the essential activity. It really is. You have to learn how to listen. And but people are hungry to be listened to and to be engaged and to have their experience be validated and to have people understand it. And even as professionals, you might think that you're above that in some way, but no, I think that your peers are just as hungry for that. But Stan, you're right. Don't try to tell them what they should think. And that's so hard. I had people get in my face and just say, the union is, I am off about this union because you've done nothing over the years. You know, our pay is crap, our work conditions are crap. And you got to sit there and take that, right? You can't go, well, but you don't understand. But wait, what about, you know, I have all those answers. I have that experience of knowing why things are the way they are in the union. But you can't justify it. You have to listen. So relational work is really about it, listening intently, formulating the questions that get people to speak from what moves them emotionally. You're not trying to understand what goes on in here with these people. You know as physicians already intellectually what the issues are. You're trying to identify what will move these people to action, and that's an emotional content. It's not an intellectual engagement, right? It's an emotional response that will move people to action.
Did you use surveys at all?
Sure, but not for this. Not for this. We use surveys for lots of things, but not for this. It's really important for this to be personal, one-on-one, face-to-face, eye-to-eye with another individual at this stage of the work. But there's plenty of times when we use surveys for lots of things. Yes, but not here.
So how did you track the results of the information that you
So during these conversations, we have a little piece of paper that just says, you know, sort of one little square, what are the issues for this person, right? And some space for comments down below. And then especially down at the bottom, back to my question about who is trusted and respected around here. And I used to even though it was totally explicit on my part, I would use it as sort of a throwaway question. You know, I would come to the end of the conversation, thank you for taking time with me, I really appreciate it. You know, gotta go, I know you're busy. And say, oh, by the way, you know, I'm gonna talk to other people in the building who are just 2 or 3 people that, you know, you really trust and respect in this building that I should talk to. Almost like it's an afterthought, almost like it doesn't really matter. You just kind of need a little help to doing the work you're doing that day, right? But that's the kernel piece of information, is to understand who are the leaders in that building or in that context. People that other people see already as peer leaders in that context. So it does take a little bit of relational organizing training, you know, organizing school that Stan's talking about. They are not just casual conversations. You need to lead them to a place where they can reveal something about themselves, where they can put themselves on the line about what matters to them, and not just talk about the weather or the Seahawks or whatever, and, you know, think that you have a relationship with them. So you got to dig out their truths, right? You have to understand how to do that, and you have to work at doing that. And part of that is, like Stan said, is like shutting up and listening. And then when you hear something, about and you can see in their body language and in their eyes, you know, what moves them, dig on that, go into that. Yeah, and I heard you talking about your mom and, you know, how she had been ill when she was young, and tell me more about that, right? Because people have really powerful emotions tied to their stories, but again, you have to listen to them. Do not argue and do not try to refute anything. Oh, we'll never have single payer. Single payer is, you know, that's the communists, and we all know that that's, you know, in the dustbin of history. You can't argue that, right? And it's not going to do you any good to try to argue that. So track the results. So this is an example, actually from a different union, actually from Kent School District, that started to adopt some of our organizing practices. But you know, after we would go out into a building and talk to people, we track the results, right? Here are the people we talked to. This is what their department was, what they teach. You know, this tells us that we actually had a sit-down visit with them, right? And this tells us how many times they were named by a peer. So we know, in Seattle, we know in every building who the peer leaders are, right? Because we've asked their peers in every building, right? So you have to track the results. You can't just, you know, you have to make a little bit of a science out of it. So from there, that's not the end, that's the start, okay? That's just the beginning, right? Once you know who the peer leaders are, then the real work sort of begins. So you can understand why I'm talking about dotness. This was the term he came up with. This person, Marla Ann, she's got dotness, right? She's got peer recognition, right? As a leader in her context, right? This guy down here, Matthew, this dude's got dotness, right? And I'm telling you, there are some buildings, there are people with serious dotness. I mean, I have charts like this where the dots like go off in the margin and then they go down the margin, and Garfield High School has like 2 people that you can't even put enough dots on the page. You just run out of space. Everybody mentions it, right? So with some of those high dot getters, right?
Of the dot people,
Yeah.
how many were already active in the union?
Not very many. And that's a problem for the union.
Yeah.
The trusted and respected people in the profession are not engaged in the union.
And of the people who were active in the union, did they get a lot of dots?
Not necessarily. There were some, but not necessarily. And that's a challenge, right? So these things aren't easily solvable because it goes back to that group of people that I talked about in the union who are sort of the people with the union identity. And if we do this and they don't come up with a lot of dots, that's kind of an ego blow for them. So you got to treat that a little bit carefully. But my experience was always that, look, there's plenty of work to do. We don't have to worry about whether there's going to be work for everyone to do. And even people that were not identified by peers as strong leaders, there's going to be opportunities for them to contribute. And it's hard to argue with bringing more people into the organization and becoming more effective. Even if they want to push back on it and say, well, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do, they're not in a strong place to argue this. Oh, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't bring more people in to the organization and have them and be a more effective, powerful organization. No, we shouldn't do that, should we? Right? So, but the next step in building the relationship with these people is to identify some of the high dot getters who are not involved in organization at the work sites where you want to have a presence. Well, you don't have a lot of people in this place, but you want to have a presence there. Identify those people. Set up in-person meetings with those people, with those peer-identified leaders. And again, going back to your question, they need to be personal. They need to be face-to-face. So in SEA's context, we identified these people, and I went out and talked to them. I went out and talked to them in person, and I acknowledged that. And I said, a lot of them, we had just been out in their buildings talking to the whole building, and said, remember when I was out here talking to people in your building about all the issues that were being faced? And I talked to you, or one of our other people talked to you. And remember that last question we asked before we left the room? We said, who are the trusted and respected people in this building? Well, your peer said you. Your peer says it's you in this building. And so I want to talk to you about that. And so we invited those people to meet with other people like them, other peer-identified leaders, without an agenda still, right? We just simply asked them, would you like to meet other people like you who have been identified by peers as a leader in your profession? And 80% of them said yes, and 80% of them showed up. If you could have an 80% show up rate for anything,
That's really high percentages.
yeah, that's huge.
These people were from different schools?
Different schools, yep. Didn't know each other.
Didn't know each other.
Yeah,
Great.
yep.
Was there a correlation for seniority?
Nope.
No. It was
Nope. Some of them were long-standing teachers who've been around forever. Some of them are really young go-getters who had just made an impression. It's just all over the place. Yeah, all over the place. So, most people are pretty flattered when they say, your peers said that you are the leader in this building, that they look to you, right? Wouldn't you like to talk to other people like that? So we set up meetings, and we sat them down, and again, we sort of asked them some open-ended questions. We didn't. One of the things that I learned later on in other places around Washington State, that other locals that sort of had heard about the work we were doing started to implement some of this work, but they didn't take it in the same direction we did. They would sort of get to this spot, and then they would go, oh yeah, I want you to lead this committee for me. Or it's like, oh, wouldn't you like to, join our political action committee? It's like, oh, wouldn't you like to be a lobbyist? Or don't you want to be the building rep? It's like, no, these people are already leaders. One of the reasons they're leaders is because they're already very focused. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They have a lot on their plates. They're already doing a ton. Other people see that. They don't want people coming up saying, I want you to do this thing for me, right? So the key is to get them to think about their leadership and then later want to lead. So just as a little example here, here's another example of the school in Seattle. You can see that, Julie Matthews here has pretty good doctness. This is a small school. It's a very small school. It only has about 20 teachers. And she had never done anything in the union. She had never been engaged in the union. She had never wanted to be in part of the union. But when we came to her and told her that she was a trusted peer in her building, she got interested. She's an early education teacher, first grade teacher. And so she ended up sort of being one of our voices for the Seattle preschool initiative from a couple of years ago that the mayor at the time helped propose. And she came out and testified on behalf of the preschool initiative and the need for pre-K education in Seattle, and stepped forward to be sort of that leader on her own once she understood that peers were looking at her as a leader. And this is important to her. And she is an early education teacher, and she is important to her. The leaders will step forward. They will step forward when they see that the work is relevant, and they'll want to do it. So it's important to plan around those leaders. This doesn't mean anything, but you can just see that. Here's a list of a whole bunch of schools, and all of these people that we're looking to in these schools for this activity were peer identified leaders, right? So, use that resource. Once you identify those leaders, use that resource in your planning to do things, whatever it is you're planning to do. So, finally, I would say, figure out what are the opportunities for collective action. And again, you're sort of focusing on those peer leaders and what they can offer you as opportunities. So once you have a database of leaders, look for the opportunities for them to act. Ask them what's relevant to them. Ask them what they would be active for and how. Right? Listen to what they tell you. Propose actions that will be relevant to them, and then especially sort of let go of your received notions of what an action is. Right? You have to be willing to listen to them and sort of receive what they're telling you, and then try to think creatively about what can you do that is in line with what is important to them? What can you create as an action that is important to them? And my last slide is to sort of avoid the gumption traps. Anyone ever read Robert Persick in The Art of Zen and Motorcycle Maintenance? He talks about gumption traps. Like what are the stumbling blocks? So one of the things that is really a stumbling block is like I was saying a minute ago, what we saw in some of the other locals that tried to do this work is they immediately went out and they asked these people to do the things that they wanted them to do. Right? I want you to join this committee. Oh, I want you to do this. I want you to go out and be a lobbyist. I want you to, I want you to be the building rep. It's like, no, let them come to you. And so we're very self-conscious about that. And I gave you the one example about the gal at the school getting involved in early childhood education. But there are many, many examples about that. Many of them around the strike that we had in 2015. Many of those people did not activate until we got very close to the strike. But then they started to lead in their building because they saw that the issues on the table were important to them, and then they became leaders in their buildings and stepped forward. They'll join when the work is relevant. So I would not focus immediately on asking these leaders to even join the organization. Right? If you can get in conversation with them and build the relationship with them, and listen to what they're saying, and then start to talk about some of the things that's important to them, and have that be on your agenda as an organization, they will come to the organization. They will want to be engaged and involved, and not have to be solicited to be involved. And we never asked a single person to become a building rep, and yet over the course of this period of time, our representative assembly doubled in size, without us ever asking any of these leaders. And many, if not most of them, who joined were these identified leaders who stepped forward to become more active in the union on a regular basis. So, you have to give them the space to sort of join on their own terms. They'll bring others with them. Because by definition, as leaders, they have followers. And that's an important thing to understand, right? Nobody's a leader. Nobody's a peer leader without followers. That goes together. They'll have followers that they will bring with them. So, I'd say, just to sum up here, in the business of your organization, you should conduct a budget and resource analysis. We talked about that a little bit. Right? In terms of organizing, creating an organizing plan where listening is key, really, and learning how to listen, training yourself how to listen, working on keeping your mouth shut, asking serious questions, deeper questions that aren't too constricting, and letting people talk and listening. Then from that leadership identification, sort of restarting your organization with those people as key people to propose things to. So, like one of the things that, as an example, one of the things that happened in really the moment when I knew this worked was in 2014, sort of in the middle of my timeline that you saw in the beginning. The district was proposing, I think I talked about this a little bit, the district was proposing budget cuts that would result in a layoff of the school secretaries. And we had been doing a budget analysis of the district over a period of years, and we understood that the district always ended up with more money left in ending fund balance than they had anticipated or than they budgeted. Right? I mean, you always budget for a certain amount of money left over for reserves, and they always ended up with $50 million more. They always said, no, we're going to only have this much, and at the end of the process, when all the money is all counted, they always had $50 million more, and just for years running. And we told them, it's like, look, you don't need to look at this. See, for every year, you always have $50 million more, and you don't need to lay off the school secretaries in order to balance the budget this year. It's like, no. This year we really got it. We know that it's super tight, and we just have to do these layoffs. Like, no, we've done the analysis. 6 years running, the spending and revenue is all the same. I mean, they're just almost lines on top of each other on the graph. It's the same. You're going to have money left over. You don't need to lay off these secretaries. And, of course, the budget director at the school, he's been doing this for years. He's not going to say, it's like, oh, yeah, the union guy comes and tells me that we got money. I'm going to believe that, right? No, it's like he's been doing this for years. It's his budget all those years that always has it left over. So his ego is totally invested in that. So we took the budget analysis out to the schools, and we showed those peer leaders. We didn't take it to the union reps in the buildings. We took it to the peer leaders. And we showed those peer leaders, look, the district's going to lay off your school secretary. They say they have no money. Here's the analysis for the last 6 years of the budget. It's exactly the same this year as it was every other year. It's going to end with somewhere between $45 and $55 million left over. We don't need What do you think of this? Well, what they thought, this is an outrage. This is crazy. We can't run our school without a school secretary, right? This is crazy. So they led the action. We never asked them to lead the action. We just showed them the analysis, showed them what was going on, and said, what do you think of this? And that resulted in there's an element in our contract where schools have to vote on the non-salary part of the budget, non-teaching salary part of the budget for the school. And so we used that as leverage that year and told our schools, like, well, one of the ways you can get action from the district is you can vote down your budget. Make the best budget you can under the circumstances they're telling you, and then vote it down. Because what happens then, it goes into a mediation process that takes forever, and it throws a big monkey wrench in the works, and it slows everything down, and the district can't do its work. So after 50 schools had voted no on their budgets, the superintendent's right-hand person calls me in to a meeting, and we sit down at the table, and he has his people there, and we have our people there, and he kind of leans forward in his chair and says, we know there are schools that are okay with their budget. They are just voting no out of solidarity. And I leaned back in my chair and said, Michael, that's exactly right. That is exactly what they're doing. And that changed the equation. But we didn't ask those leaders to do that. We just showed them what was going on.
But don't you need a leader of the leaders to organize it?
Yes, and that's who you are. That's what your board is. I mean, I don't know that in my school, even, that I would have a lot of dots. Right? You need those initial people, whoever they are, however you get them. Right? I'm talking about going to the next step. Right? How do you get broader participation? And I think, in my experience in the teaching sector, and I think there are correspondences for you, it's really about making that appeal to people that peers see as trusted and respected voices in their profession, in their work, in their workplace, in their day-to-day lives. Right?
Incidentally, it's a little off the subject, but I'm curious about what actions are being taken by your colleagues to address this charter school business.
Yeah.
Take a few minutes to tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm not the president anymore, so I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But we actually talked about that at the last monthly meeting, and it's really heart-wrenching for most people who are strong public school supporters. We pushed back very hard on it when the law was being proposed, and actually organized a whole bunch of presence at the public hearing meetings where the charter school organizations were proposing their schools. But it's one of those things that is on the radar screen for us, and I think is a concern. Most of us are very worried that it's going to, over time, if it gets rolling like it has in some other states, that it can really have a huge impact on public education and be detrimental for public education. Fortunately, the law is fairly limited at this point. There's only a very small number that can be chartered in any given year. Some states have thrown it wide open, and there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of proposed charter schools every year, and they pop up and then fail and go away, and others pop up. But here, there's actually a more rigorous law about how to start a charter school. But the short answer is I don't know for sure what the long-term picture is going to be. What I do know is that organized unions that are powerful in the state context will have an opportunity to have a say about it in Olympia. And I say that way because I'm not convinced that every local in WA is doing the kind of work that we did here in Seattle. In fact, I know they're not, and I am not super happy with WEA and the way they have approached organizing, or not approached it, in my view. So I worry about that a little bit. But if locals are organized and powerful and can be influential in Olympia, I think we'll have a better outcome on charters than a lot of states.
I was going to say something about the leader of the leaders. Another reason I flunked out of organizing school is the temperament of the leader of the leaders. And what I saw over and over again, this astonished me. It was very impressive. The best organizers were invisible, like a ship that passed and there wasn't a ripple left on the water. And this is kind of the stories that Jonathan is telling. If you are seen as the leader of the leaders, then they stop their initiative and they wait for you to tell them. And so you think of the leader as a president, a visionary, charismatic, right? And then you will also flunk out of organizing school. So the organizer is actually the opposite of all those things. The organizer gets the other people to speak, gets them to see what they want, and that idea of their comfort zone, not your vision. And some people are good at it, and some people aren't. And
There's a lot of skills you can learn.
but a lot of it can be learned, right?
So, along those lines, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a big pushback in this. Well, let me go back. Remember I said Garfield has, on the dot chart, there's like two people that are just like off the charts with dots. So some of you will remember, perhaps from the news a few years ago, there was a big pushback on standardized testing, and Garfield sort of led the way. And so the person that sort of pushed that issue at that school was one of those guys with dots just off the page. Very charismatic guy, charismatic leader, sort of photogenic, really well-spoken, sort of your stereotypical leader, as Stan is talking about. In 2014, he ran against me during my re-election campaign, and I beat him. He was probably the most recognized teacher in America at that time. He was on MSNBC every other week. He was traveling the country talking about the standardized testing boycott. Nice guy, remember? I liked the guy. But sort of what Stan said there is sort of to the point. There's a difference between being the sort of seen leader that sort of fits the stereotype that we have about leadership and being effective at making an organization more effective.
Sort of Trumpian.
Sorry?
Trumpian.
Trumpian. So I think that's what I wanted to say. I'm happy to engage with people more sort of individually, and you're welcome to take down the information here.
Well, you're talking about revitalizing the union. We're a sort of a single-purpose physician organization, and we're in a pretty remarkable political environment trying to do one of the, it's been a little eclipsed in the last, 6 months or so, but we're trying to do a very progressive thing with healthcare. And when I look at trying to make something happen politically, or in healthcare, I spend an awful lot of my time on the insurance side of healthcare in this state. And the way things change is there's a wave that comes, and you ride the wave and try and get to the right place. And there's a big wave, and I would think that the environment we're working within now might help us think through. We don't just go to each Seattle school. We have to go to the various physician collectives, which are maybe Academy of Family Physicians, or maybe house staffs, or maybe the teachers of family medicine, for example, is where you're going to find leaders and opinion makers. To me, the difference between our environment and what you've described, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yep. No, there certainly are differences, and I don't want to belittle them. But using your metaphor, what I want to be clear about is I'm talking about creating the wave. Being at the source of the wave that you talked about. When I had to lobby Frank Chop in 2014 to not change teacher evaluation, to not do what Arnie Duncan was pressuring him to do, right? Obama's Secretary of Education was pressuring him to bring the vote to the floor in the Washington State Legislature to change the law on teacher evaluation to make the state require the use of the student test score as a growth measure for teacher evaluation, which is a bad idea. I can spend a whole evening talking about that. What I told Frank is, if you change it, you'll have teachers in the streets. That's what I told him. And that vote never came to the floor. Yes, there are cultural phenomenons happening, and it's important to try to harness them and get on the right side of movement. But it's also important to try to make a movement and not just wait for someone else to do it.
So the making the movement, the analogy for this organization would be practicing physicians who are like-minded and are leaders in their environment.
Right, in their environment. Some of them will lobby. Some of them will know people in the legislature. Some of them will have contacts in their communities. Some, and listening to them about where the opportunities are and where to leverage their passion, right, and their skills and their passion to make that wave happen. Not just in the doctor community, not just among physicians, but sort of leading the discussion. Because you guys are uniquely placed, as I said, just like teachers are. Right? Nobody can come to doctors and say, I know better than you what's going on in healthcare.
Oh, they do.
Well, but they're not credible, and they try to do that with teachers. There's a whole ed reform community out there saying, well, teachers' unions are the problem, and teachers are the problem, and so you have to create your effectiveness in order to become the voice for single payer, right? As I said back here, where did I say it? Advocacy, become the essential voice for healthcare reform, right? Is to position yourself so that you are that, pushing that wave, right, in all the different ways that your peers can. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your humanitarian work, and how was that, and if that also informs this framework that you make for leadership.
Huh.
Can you repeat
Well, my humanitarian work in Bosnia, how did it, if so, and how so did it inform my organizing work for teachers? No one has ever asked me that question. That's an outstanding question. So I don't know. I have to think about that more. It's I think the thing that most informed my work in the union, coming out of my experience in Bosnia, was to understand that, and this is probably a failing of mine from my upbringing or something, because prior to my experience in Bosnia, I really was sort of everybody can get along, and we're all one big human family, and we should all understand that, and I don't think I understood how evil functioned in the world, how evil happens. We're pretty sheltered here in America, and so it was life-changing to go to Bosnia and go to Sarajevo and during the war, and to drive across Sarajevo and look at every single open space in the entire city being covered with graves. Not a square foot hardly in the city that was not built out, that didn't have a building on it, that wasn't covered in gravestones.
Covered in what?
Gravestones.
Oh, gravestones.
Yeah. And to, you know, to see that, and then to be cynically captured by the Serbs on one side and detained and being accused of being, you know, when we're a humanitarian organization that's working with all sides in the conflict and working on medical supplies. You know, understanding that the sort of the banality of evil, and that it, you know, the structural component of evil in the world, and sort of the institutional inertia, how it creates really bad outcomes sometimes. And I think that, you know, coming back with that understanding more clearly in mind helped me be able to navigate institutions and think about individuals within institutions, for sure.
The nature of medicine is, in part, one that is beneficial to everybody. It is something that we think of as a common good, as you described, and as we've described. Yet, it has been co-opted by money and greed at many levels, including the personal level of the practitioner, of the institutions that we work in. And so I'm sort of wondering, I can't quite navigate that in this equation. And I think these little kids out there in the streets this weekend and this week are so inspiring because
Down in Florida.
they don't have any of those filters.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to see how we really grow this organization the way we need to in order to, with the filter of my livelihood, my kids got to go to college, I need a new car, time for a vacation, my boss is pushing me to do blah, 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 blah.
Yep. Now, you know, it's hard to be part of an institution and not be beholden to it on some level, and that's really true of teachers, I think. I don't have an easy answer on that. I think it's a personal thing that everyone has to grapple with. The one thing I will say is, there are peer leaders that you will identify that don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's fine. I mean, there are people out there in Seattle schools. I think of this one guy over at Madison Middle School. He's like the god over there. And I have talked to him so many times and invited him in different ways but he just doesn't want to have anything to do with the union. And that's okay. There's going to be a few of those. But there are many people who will share your values and who have the similar experiences and will identify with your experience and commiserate with you about it and be equally passionate about it and outraged and ready to engage and ready to work collectively. Not everybody, but a lot will. 80% of 80% is a lot of people. Right? Yeah.
There are several medical organizations in this area that are very progressive and have the best interests of their patients at heart. And we're trying to work together. There are some that are, pure single payer, or that's the main focus, and we work together pretty well. There's some that are more centrist. They're definitely progressive people, but they're more transactional rather than transformative, which we single payer sees ourselves as transformative, and that's the only way to get where we need to be. So I was kind of wondering, in your teacher organization, are there subgroups within it or other teacher organizations that are more along those lines, that we really need to work together? And I think we're doing a reasonably good job of it, but some organizations say, well, I can't work with them because, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So, I think there's analogies there. one of the things I did in bargaining in 2015 was to really reach out to organizations in the community-based organizations that I felt had some sympathy for what we were trying to accomplish with public education. Not that, they were exactly on the same page on everything, that they thought exactly like we do, but, that they were more on our end of the spectrum than not. And, and there are some that I didn't touch. I mean, I don't know how many of you know the education groups, but, Stand for Education, Stand for Children, I guess it's called, we call them Stand on Children. It's not one of the organizations that I felt like we could work with, but there are some other sort of organizations that qualify themselves as sort of ed reform that we did in fact engage with and have engaged with. That's sort of one thing that I think is, alliance building is really crucial, and I didn't really talk about this at all. What I'm talking about is building the power and effectiveness of your own organization so that you become an entity that other people want to build an alliance with. And then from there, you have lots of opportunities. And maintaining your integrity in that process, I think is fine. Most progressive organizations are going to understand that you might see things a little bit differently than them, but yet you share a lot of overlap. Enough overlap to work together a lot of the time. But again, like here's an example. So after the strike in 2015, or even during the strike in 2015, I was solicited really heavily by the mayor, and or confidentially, since he's out of office now anyway, assured that he was supporting our work. Whereas in most cities, the mayor would be supporting the school district. And so he put at the disposal of the populace the city's parks and community centers where kids could go during the strike and advertise that. He didn't have to do that. But he did that because he understood that SEA is a powerful organization and it was important to partner with us. Prior to my presidency, nothing like that ever happened with SEA. We were never solicited. We weren't even asked for endorsements by candidates, right? But after that, lots of candidates asked to be interviewed and endorsed. So it's really, in just that short period of time, it's very remarkable to me sort of what the transformation was of the public profile of the organization. And it really has to do with the other people who are watching from the outside seeing, it's like, wow, that organization is moving. They are going somewhere. They have something happening. Right? I want to be part of that. I want to be allied with that. I want to know more about that. And your organization, the advantage that you have, yes, there are other organizations working on healthcare and all of that, but you're the organization that has, physicians in your name, right? And that's the similarity with us. We're the organization that has teachers in our name, right? So, yeah.
How about, like in our case, we probably have more dedicated people out of the healthcare field. Oh, am I supposed to speak up? In our case, we have a lot of people who are dedicated activists that might, be here for 5-6 years. I don't know. You could probably, half of these people here have been 5 or 6 years involved in this. Your average teacher lasts 5 years. How much transitory type aspect is there to your not organizing in a very sustained fashion?
You have to keep organizing in a sustained fashion. In order to maintain your effectiveness, I firmly believe you have to sort of stay in touch with the people that are there. That does change. Teaching has turnover. But it doesn't lose the fact that there are natural peer leaders in every context, even if that evolves. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Amazing.
I appreciate it.
Really wonderful.
That is great.
And I think I'm gonna have a great video.
Oh, good. I'm all for great videos.
I should probably run it by.
There's a great video of me at the Benaroya Hall, if you want to look for it on YouTube, that actually documents the unanimous strike vote
Oh, which one?
at Benaroya Hall, 2000.